Now we begin a look at the second time period covered by the APUSH framework, which will stretch from about 1607 through about 1754, although there are some events in development that occur both before and after this time period that are relevant to the time period. The key concepts for this time period focuses on a variety of different colonization patterns, different goals, and different results for the major colonial empires in the Americas, including the Spanish, French, Dutch, and British colonizers. We will particularly focus on the British colonization of North America, as much of that territory eventually becomes the United States. Some of the key topics covered in this unit include the patterns of colonization, the different regions of British colonization, transatlantic trade, interactions with native peoples, slavery and labor systems, particularly in the British colonies, as well as the developing colonial society and culture. Looking first at this key topic of European colonization, we're going to pay particular attention to migration, with a look at what led to it as well as what resulted from it. Spanish settlements did not take hold in North America as fast as they did in Central and South America, mainly due to the lack of large established civilizations of Native Americans in North America that the Spanish could move in and exploit for their own purposes. There was also a lack of area that could be mined for gold and silver, which was a major part of the Spanish economic activity in the New World. Although they also practiced agriculture, the area around the Caribbean served those purposes best, as this was where crops like sugarcane and tobacco thrived. And considering the conversion of native peoples to Christianity was also a major goal of the Spanish, they would want to concentrate their efforts in the areas with the greatest native populations. Although the Spanish did establish settlements in Florida, as well as had mission systems in Texas, New Mexico, and California, these areas had relatively small native populations, even well into the 18th century. Since much of North America didn't have those large concentrations of Spanish settlements, it gave an opening for other nations to try and gain a foothold in these areas where the Spanish were not. As a side note, the Portuguese were also able to establish a presence in eastern Brazil in South America, because it fell on their side of a renegotiated Treaty of Tordesillas. But as that isn't North America, we're going to mostly leave them alone. The French and the Dutch settlements were both similar and different to that of the Spanish. The French were more interested in trade, so they first tried to find a route through the New World so that they could get to the lucrative resources in Asia. Even then, they delayed their efforts until after about 1524, largely because of the large amount of wars that they were involved in throughout Europe. It was not until almost the mid-1500s, during a long break in Anglo-French warfare, that they began to make contacts and temporary settlements in North America. Their first permanent settlement came in Quebec in 1608, but despite this, mostly they established trading settlements which were more temporary or seasonal in nature, trading with Native American groups, primarily in the areas of the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley. The economic focus of the French was mostly the fur trade, which they came to dominate. Like the Spanish and the French, the Dutch were also economically motivated and thus established a trading colony of New Amsterdam in 1624, after failing to find a passageway through the continent. Unlike the Spanish, though, they were not particularly interested in converting Native Americans to Christianity. The Dutch, they were Protestant, not Catholic, and they focused almost exclusively on economic gain in the areas of fishing and farming, especially that lucrative fur trade. One way in which both the French and the Dutch helped to cement their trade alliances with the native peoples was through intermarriage and treaties with the Native Americans. England was more different than all of the others. After her ascension to the throne of England, Queen Elizabeth I would actively work to try and subvert the policies of the Spanish in the New World. Remember, of course, her half-sister Mary, the previous monarch, had been married to Philip II of Spain, and he wasn't particularly pleased that he wasn't allowed to inherit the English throne at her death, even though their marriage contract had explicitly stated that only a child of their union would be able to rule both countries. They never had children. Elizabeth, though, did not engage in outright warfare, instead using mostly privateers, private individuals who received some crown protection, to attack Spanish ships, though this position changes somewhat once the English defeat the Spanish Armada in 1588, which ultimately weakened the naval dominance of the Spanish, since so much of their fleet had been destroyed, both from the fighting, but actually mostly from a very terrible storm. The English became more interested in permanent settlement after Elizabeth's death, primarily due to economic troubles at home and the disappearance of land thanks to the enclosure movement, the process of converting farmland to pasture land. In addition, England's involvement in many costly wars with France, as well as the conquering of Ireland, led to the upper classes needing to replenish their wealth. Foodstuffs, brought over because of the Columbian Exchange, had improved nutrition and had thus caused an explosive growth in population, straining the resources of the British Isles. And when you figure that that population was desperate for work, mostly on farms, which were being replaced by grazing, because the English wool industry was starting to dominate European markets, you had tremendous numbers of people that were willing to take a chance somewhere relatively unknown. Add to that laws of primogeniture that limited the transfer of land and wealth between generations meant that younger sons were looking for financial opportunities of their own, and an overseas colony seemed like the perfect fit. So what you had was multiple social classes seeking economic gain. Still, other English groups were seeking political and religious freedom, and they would use settlements in North America as a place to practice both a limited form of self-government as well as to escape religious persecution. And so all of these would serve as significant motivations to the in the various regions of what became the United States.